I'm good.
Hey, Alice. Okay. Zoom it. Well, that was a real silent one. That was a real silent one.
I, I know. It, it distorts my vision too.
Turn your mic.
Clerk Paul, can we call the committee hold to order, please?
Lennon.
Here.
Ramirez.
Here.
Reardon. Here. Fate. Santoy. Ruiz. Here. Avila.
Here.
Nowak.
Here.
7 present, Mayor.
Make a motion to excuse Alderman Santoy.
Second.
Motion by Vila, seconded by Ruiz to excuse Alderman Santoy. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Okay, so the only item we have on the committee of the whole tonight is the Axon body in cameras. Chief Semaglia, you want to lead it off?
Yes, tonight I'm going to have Sergeant Joe Fitzgerald and Commander Michael Laughter presenting the information about Axon body cameras and in-car video systems. Once they're done with their presentation, we'll have a couple of guest speakers, and then they'll be open and receptive to questions.
Okay.
Joe, Mike?
The only thing I'm going to ask is if, I think we have to put that podium in the center here so it could be picked up by the cameras for whoever's speaking. That would be good, Chief. Thank you. Sergeant?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Is this working out?
Yep.
Excellent. All right. Well, good evening. This is a highly anticipated conversation we're going to have today. We're going to clarify some of the issues that are out there, and my hope, this particular presentation has been made for the elected officials, and we urge you to ask as many questions as possible as we move forward. That's all I ask at this point. So let's start the conversation here today. We're here today for 3 major issues that have bubbled up over the last couple months and weeks. What we want to do here today, we want to do 3 things. We want to be able to address the concerns that are brought up by public officials and by the community and your constituents. Secondly, during those points of clarity, we want to provide an overview on it. There's a process that was put in place. We want to be able to bring that to the table for conversation. And secondly, most importantly, and this is where everybody in this room steps in, is engage in discussion. We want to open up by framing this initiative on here. So the Berwyn Police Department has been pursuing this initiative for the continued safety of the community. Internal dialogue was started in the summer of 2019, and without a doubt, the climate of 2020 elevated the need to move forward with this process more expeditiously. So while we transition into that, this is what we're going to be talking about tonight. 4 major things. I'm sure at some point there's going to be some deviations and other questions, but a lot of it focuses in on 4 major things that we need to discuss and have the conversation on. 1, that this was no bid, non-competitive. There's a narrative going out there. It is not true. We'll walk you through the process. Secondly, the perceived lack of policy that is out there. Third, and most importantly, the benefits to the police and the community, more importantly, community, and how we're going to transition tonight's conversation into a public conversation moving forward. We need to understand what the expectations, wants, and needs are from the people that we all serve at this point. And for lack of a better term, the million-dollar question, costs on here. The first issue is the
Joe?
Yes, sir.
If you feel comfortable when you're speaking into the mic, so it gets picked up, you can put your mask
Oh.
down, so, because it's a little hard to hear, especially if with the camera, so.
Good, very
Okay.
good.
Thank you.
Makes it a lot easier. Thank you. All right. Now we're cooking. The first issue we're going to talk about tonight is the no bid, non-competitive issue. Good evening. I want to walk you through where the chief started administrative discussion back in June of 2019 to where we're at today. There's a number of steps that we've all been involved in this process, not only from the police department, but from the elected officials as well. The first is this. From June 19 to June 2020, there was internal discussion. We spoke about earlier that the events at the earlier part of this year raised concerns for us to take on this project a little more expeditiously. So in June 2020, at the end of June, the police department and its administration had its first initial contact in a general sense concerning body cameras with Axon. Keep in mind, we've had a 15-year relationship with them for our cameras, and we're going to see how that all triangulates later on into the conversation. But we invited them to speak because we wanted to, the police department wanted to forward the conversation at that point. Early in July of 2020, the Berwyn Police Department learned of the Sourcewell option. Now we're gonna define what Sourcewell is. It's a governmental buying agency that works on behalf of local, state, federal entities across the United States. So we're gonna back up there at that point, right? Once we learned about this information, we delved into it a little bit more. And to keep our timelines on here is that in November of 2019, Sourcewell already began their RFP process for an initiative that was very similar to what we were looking for. Sourcewell, just from a 50,000-foot view, does RFP analysis and awards contracts for local, state, and federal agencies. Being able to add rigor, analysis, and legitimacy to the competitive bid process is what Sourcewell does. Sourcewell was created by Minnesota state law as a service cooperative to provide programs and services to educational and governmental agencies. Sourcewell was established with the statutory purpose to assist public agencies in meeting specific needs, which are more efficiently delivered cooperatively, rather than by acting alone as an entity. This is important to know because there's actually strength in numbers on this. So let's look at Sourcewell by the numbers. They have clients in all 50 states. There's over 50,000 participating organizations. Approximately 299 of those are participating Illinois municipalities. 2019, their fiscal year. In their 2019 fiscal year, 895 Illinois projects completed $39 million in competitively bidded and awarded contracts. And the question out there is, has Berwyn ever used Sourcewell, and our school district did in the past, to the tune of $191,000 for one of their initiatives? So it's a legitimate company. It's used out there. Berwyn has used it in the past, and we are taking we're taking the opportunity to fit this into our overall process on there. And this is what really needs to be clarified out on here, is that the following slides will show the process that Sourcewell went through, and Berwyn Police Department, as a member agency to Sourcewell, followed the same in suit. Back in November of 2019, Sourcewell did their RFP 010720. It was entitled Public Safety Video Surveillance Solutions with Related Equipment, Software, and Accessories. Bingo. That hit all of our points that we wanted to take a different view at and take a deeper dive, seeing how it fits into what our purchasing process was at this point. Their overall process in November 19, they opened their RFP. It closed in January 20, and in February 2020, the RFP was analyzed, proposal committee awarded contracts. But we have to take a little deeper dive into that. What makes Sourcewell what they are, and what were the steps that we would have done if we would have done an RFP rather than Sourcewell acting on our behalf as a participating member? There's the identification of needs. There's the seeking of authorization. There's drafting of solicitation, conducting proposal conferences, receipt of proposals, evaluation of responses, recommendations, awarding of contract, and posting of results. From soup to nuts, that's what Sourcewell did during November 19 through February of 20. This is a little screenshot of their final findings letter. And we can see that these are the individuals from Sourcewell that made that decision. To clarify what this letter says on here, let's break it down. Between November 7th of 2019 and January 7th of 2020, approximately 80 vendors expressed interest and 23 responded to the nationwide open request for proposal for, just to remind you, public safety video surveillance solutions with related equipment, software, and accessories. The finding of Sourcewell's proposal evaluation committee subsequently recommended the award of Sourcewell contract 010720 to the following companies: Axon, Laser Aiming Systems, doing business as Viridian Weapon Technologies, Panasonic Sensing Solutions, and WatchGuard Video. The chief felt comfortable at that point moving forward. It was his decision, based on recommendations from his administration, to move forward with the contract, knowing that the process went through everything that we spoke about. It's important to know because we utilize this as a baseline reference. The finding of Sourcewell's final recommendation provided the Berwyn Police Department a solid baseline for further discussion regarding the utilization of Axon as a potential vendor. Remember, it also plays into the fact that we've had a relationship with them for over 15 years with our TASER technology. Secondly, as a baseline reference, the procedural actions performed by Sourcewell on our behalf as members served as validation for our department to benefit from while saving time and resources. We all know in this room and from past experiences that if we would have done an RFP by ourselves, it would have taken a long time. We're balancing our needs with getting something that we believe is needed in the community and we utilize Sourcewell through our membership to help expedite that process. There were 4 recommended vendors with their final recommendation that were awarded contracts. Why did we go with Axon if there was other vetted vendors? It's a question that anyone should be asking at this point, but let's clarify that out. The chief and his administration had prioritized actions. Now, this is going to be a mouthful, but it's important. The goal of this project was to integrate a vendor-based solution that aligned with our existing infrastructure to ensure continuity of operations in an efficient and effective manner. Let's jump down to the pyramid down there. Whatever vendor we choose, ideally has to incorporate their body cameras, the storage, and the equipment into one umbrella that makes operations better. We've dealt with interfaces before. We've dealt with competing proprietary software. It's not an easy process. This was one of our main talking points as to moving forward. And some of those things that we were talking about on there, if we had to boil it down to some major questions as to what were our action points and needs on the police department side. What vendor would give us the ability to house and share video data in one source rather than multiple sources going around? Secondly, what vendor offered package purchases that would integrate seamlessly with our existing infrastructure, meaning our tasers and our taser systems? And lastly, one of the big talking points from an administrative review was what vendor will allow us to communicate with Cook County Circuit Court through the use of evidence.com, which is their go-forward solution moving forward. That's important. We're very busy. You'll see later on, and you probably realize that we're a very busy department, and that facilitating that need is necessary, especially with the communication with Cook County. 4 vendors that we spoke about before: Axon, Panasonic, WatchGuard, and Berwyn. We did our in-house analysis. After discussing those points on there for reduction of operating systems, integration of existing hardware to workflow, evidence.com integration with state and county courts, comprehensive technology upgrade packages, those were the things that stood out with Axon that made us want to continue on with them as our preferred choice moving forward. Does that make Panasonic, WatchGuard, or Berwyn bad? No, it doesn't. But with other ones, we see strengths and we see weaknesses on there. And you're more than welcome to ask me those later on down the road on here, but I want to continue on with the conversation. But this is the methodology that we utilized to get to this point. Axon works best, especially when we're looking at what vendor can provide us camera storage and equipment along the way. So, August 2020, with the chief's decision to move forward with the contract, initial COW back in August, deferred action in September, here we are today. We hope that this clarifies the steps that we took and the process that we relied on as members of Sourcewell to move this forward. The contract, if we are to move forward with Axon, is tied to Sourcewell. And we know that because it's a small number down there, but our membership number, 183585, is tied to the contract on there. So, again, there's going to be more questions along the way. We'd appreciate it, but we want to do an overview and walk you through the process of what was going on in the back end that wasn't really clearly spoke about or asked or questioned between August and now, that we want to clarify and tie up any loose ends as we move forward. Second issue that was of a concern to the community was our policy. Our policy is drafted and is currently under review. The Berwyn Police Department has drafted policy regarding body-worn cameras and in-car video systems. The policy is based off of model policies that meet or exceed standards set by the State of Illinois Law Enforcement Worn Body Camera Act. It's 50 ILCS 706-10. Berwyn's policy for body cameras has been drafted but not yet approved. It hasn't been approved because we don't have body cameras. It hasn't been approved because we're still seeking input from championing parties. It hasn't been approved because we're looking for any holes that need to be solidified, especially those brought up by city council members and city leaders as we move this forward. It's a working document. It's very comprehensive, and it's a very, very expedited start that when we get to there, benefits the community, the police, and the city. After administrative review, union, and legal review by BPD, we will approve the final draft and make available for public view via the city's webpage. But we're not at that point yet. We do have to get to that point. Riffing off of that, we understand that the policy, right? So we spoke about a no bid, we spoke about policy, we're going to speak about benefits, and we're going to speak about costs. This is a great time to let the public know that there will be community listening sessions, and that anything that hasn't been addressed today or that still needs to be addressed into the future will be addressed by representatives of the police department. Right now, we have 2 listening sessions set up. Thursday, October 15th in English, and Thursday, October 22nd in Spanish. They'll be held at the Morton West High School Freshman Center, 6:30 to 8:30. And what we want to do, right? What we want to do is we're desperately looking for community input at this point. The wants, needs, perceptions, processes, pros and cons. There are pros and there are cons. We'll talk about that. But they have to be brought up. And they need to be addressed and move forward. So our commitment as a police department is based on recent community feedback. Above are some of the topics we hope to address during our upcoming listening sessions. Chain of custody, training, announcing usage, turning cameras on and off. That's not a comprehensive list, but that's what we've been hearing from the community of what needs to be addressed. And it's not just addressing it, it is, we're looking forward to the opportunity to clarify concerns, provide literacy on our policy, our program, our procedures, and build trust with the communities that we serve. We recognize that police community input counts. When done well, people who feel engaged in the process and work collectively towards a common objective generally realize benefits and deliver results. We have a lot of moving parts that we have to deal with. There's the people part, there's the process part, but we cannot overlook the most important thing out there is the culture part. Everyone's culture is important to them, and we realize that. But how are we going to find that happy balance in the middle of moving this initiative forward? Just an overview of how we're going to be. This is an idealized view of what we're looking for. We know that there's going to be different spheres of influence out there. From the pro side, from the con side, from the I don't know side, right? And each one of those little bubbles represents someone's needs and wants. What we need to do is during the listening sessions, our goal, our commitment is to identify those common objectives, community needs and wants, perceptions, pros and cons, and costs, things that affect the community, whether directly or indirectly, and we need to take that and we need to move those conversations forward into one unified result. The third issue is the benefits that we have. This is an overarching benefit that we're looking at, community safety. This project was conceived with community safety in mind. The police department believes that cameras help us paint a clearer picture and allow us to build trust with our community members. This is overarching in the beliefs of the police department and one of the reasons why we want to move this forward. One of the more important slides that we'll have on here today, and I think we really need to focus in on that. We're going to start out with our values on here, of why this slide is important. The BPD values being prepared for the low probability, high impact incident if it occurs. And I'll repeat that again because it's important. We value being prepared for the low probability, high impact incident if it occurs. These numbers that you see on this inverted pyramid are averages based off of our call volumes between 2017 and 2019. 73,538 calls for service, 6,128 traffic stops, 1,156 domestic violence calls. That's where our officers respond to on a yearly basis, on a daily basis. Now let that settle in for a second, because when you look at all these incidences that occur, when these high impact incidents occur across the nation, our knowledge and our experience shows that a majority of them emanate from traffic stops. A majority of them emanate from domestic violence calls when we respond to them. With the amount of calls that we go to and the amount of calls that have a higher probability of having that happen, something, that low probability, high impact incident will occur at some point. We're very fortunate that it hasn't occurred yet. And I think that speaks volumes of the professionalism of the police officers that are responding to these calls. But it is important that if this tool can be used for the benefit of the community and the benefit of the officers that are responding to these amount of calls on a yearly basis, it's something that you need to consider with your pros and cons moving forward. It's really important that we ask this question again: how do we deal with the aftermath of a low probability, high impact event? There's a lot of narrative across the country that recent events throughout the United States have demonstrated that the use of video and audio, or lack of use, can heavily influence the direction and veracity of overall narratives for a given situation. So take a minute while I'm speaking here and look at the question that we posed for not only the elected officials in this room, but we're going to pose for our community members as well. Can you recall a past or recent incident or event that made you question, what if? What if one of these incidences that have occurred across our nation happened here? How would we deal with the aftermath of it? And that's a conversation point we need to have moving forward. We understand that there's pros and there's cons to this initiative. It's not a silver bullet. This isn't the answer. But when we look at what we deal with, we look at the culture, we look at the demographics of our population, I think what we need to do is we need to take the pros and cons, and we need to find the balance in this conversation. Is it the right way? Is it the wrong way? Now you know where we're at. We're in favor of it, right? We're in favor of it. How do we find that balance moving forward? There's been a lot of side narratives on the processes, but we're going to start getting into the needs and wants of it, right? So just to frame the conversation and priming you for questions that are coming out later on, hopefully, right, from the individuals in this room. This is directly from the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs. Dr. Michael White put together his white paper and literature review, and we wanted to really boil the portion that he had with benefits and issues or pros and cons on here. Increased transparency and legitimacy, improved police officer behavior, improved citizen behavior, expedited resolution of complaints and lawsuits, improved evidence for arrest and prosecution, and opportunities for police training. Those are all great things. They're great. There's issues, though, too, that need to be addressed. And a lot of it's going to be coming from the community sessions. A lot of it's going to be coming from questions that you, acting on behalf of your constituents, need to address. Citizens' privacy, officers' privacy, officers' health and safety, training and policy requirements, logistical and resource requirements, including data, storage, and retrieval. On top of what we spoke about before, the process of how this happened, the policy that we need in place, the costs that are going to be incurred moving forward. But that's what good conversation is about. Weighing the pros and cons and finding a balance on what's going to be the best overall move for our police department and our city and our citizens moving forward. We can't stress enough that community input is key. We like to frame it in here. We're discussing things that we know. I can talk about the process, we can talk about costs, we can talk about policy, but we have to be cognizant that there may be things that we don't know, and then there's things that we don't even realize that we're missing. And that's where we have to tap into the collective to find that out. That's important. The police department is very deliberate in addressing these needs as we move forward with this process. In a second, I'm going to be turning over the conversation to two outstanding individuals, Regina Holloway and Bertha Purnell. But before I end that, before I transition over to them, we really need to figure out how we're going to initiate critical community impact conversations. Now, I can say that the Berwyn Police Department recognizes three major needs. Berwyn has a diverse population that has not been given the opportunity to provide valuable feedback and insight. We've heard from some, but not from all. And I think that's a disservice because a majority of the individuals speaking have not been fully representative of the amount of individuals that are part of our demographics. They have allies, and it's great to hear from their allies. But it's also important to hear straight from them, which leads to the second point that we have on here. We understand and we recognize the need to engage our marginalized, disaffected, and scared populations to help drive needed discussions on their wants and needs in our community. There's distrust between members of our community and the police department. And that's not because Berwyn Police Department is a bad police department, that's just the overall narrative. We talk about it with systemic injustices and everything that's led up to the national temperature at this point. And we recognize that. And with the demographics of individuals that we have in our community, we're not hearing enough from them. And we understand why we may not have heard enough, but we need to hear from them. We need to build that trust down here. And that's where we're hoping that Regina and Bertha can help open the door for those conversations to happen. Because finally, what we need to do is we need to critically hear from these populations in a constructive manner. It's imperative for this project to be successful. Cameras are going to help on a daily procedural thing with police departments, and they'll be a tool that we use. But remember what we spoke about. If that low probability, high impact event occurs, how are we as a city, a community, and a police department going to deal with it? We talked about utilizing cameras as an objective way to clear, to offer an objective view. It's a tool, but it has to be accepted by all, and we understand that and we recognize that. So as I transition over to Ms. Holloway and Ms. Purnell, I would like to say that they can speak on how City of Berwyn and the Berwyn Police Department can better address the needs and concerns of the community regarding similar initiatives like ours based on their previous work with other communities across the nation. We're not unique, right? We have our own culture that's identifiable with Berwyn, but we're not unique with the issues that communities have with the police departments. They're an excellent gateway. But I also want to speak on this, and it's very important. It's very important, and it's no disrespect to them on here, but the answers for this initiative aren't going to come from them. The answers are not going to come from them. Rather, they're going to provide us insight on how will our community come together and form a right opinion and building that trust moving forward. So it's important that they help us bridge that gap, because this is our public call to action. For the public, attend a session, write an email, post to social media. Let us hear your voice and let us hear your concerns. Because if we don't hear it, we can't address it. And as Ms. Holloway and Ms. Purnell have dealt in the past with other communities that had this disconnect with their marginalized, disaffected, and scared populations, we need to hear from them on how we can start that process moving forward and make the most out of the upcoming sessions and upcoming conversations as we move forward. So I will turn over to you both. When they're done talking on their behalf, Commander Oshner will be talking about costs, and then we'll transition to question and answer period.
Hello, sir. Such a pleasure to be here with all of you. I am not a very formal person, so I'm really here to tell you a bit about myself and my experience, and I hope that resonates with you, and to offer my assistance to the extent that I can be helpful. And I'm here with my friend and also former colleague, and I'll tell you a little bit about our relationship and how it came to be. So the first thing I want to tell you is that I'm Regina Holloway. I'm the VP of Community Impact at Axon, but this is a very new role for me. I came into this role only in July, which is just a few months ago. I'm a lawyer by trade, and my entire career post-law school has been in social justice law. First in running investigations surrounding housing discrimination in Boston, then as a criminal defense attorney in the Boston District Courts. And then I'll tell you in a second how I end up in Chicago, because I actually live here in Evanston. I grew up, just a little background on me, in West Philadelphia, in a vulnerable community with a lot of violence during the 80s, during a crack cocaine epidemic, and a lot of over-policing, to be honest with you. And so I had definitely a lot of trauma growing up, and I've seen a lot of violence. And so community for me is not just, this is not my job, this is my life. I am a black woman, I have 4 black children, and I think the statistics speak for themselves that we're in a crucial and critical time in this country, at least in my lifetime. And so then I'll jump back and tell you how I end up in Chicago. I end up in Chicago because of Laquan McDonald. I end up in Chicago because, as you know, in your very own backyard, after the murder of Laquan McDonald, there was no transparency and there was no accountability. So what they did was they dismantled the organization that handled oversight, and they created a new one. And I came here as a supervising investigator of a major case squad. My time supervising a group of investigators for a major case, which is the only major case squad in the department, was handling pretty much on a weekly basis officer-involved shootings, tons of them. I've showed up at scenes in the middle of the night. I've gone to police stations afterwards. I've seen the evidence from beginning to end. And what I can tell you is that for both the officers involved and for sometimes the victims or sometimes the suspects, that the stakes are extremely high. These are people's careers that have families, and then the folks that find themselves shot by police or killed for whatever reason have families too. So these issues are critical. And so what we did in every single incident of a shooting, there are two things that I want to know from that officer in that investigation. Why was your body-worn camera not on? And why did you not deploy your taser? Every single incident starts with those questions. Why was your body-worn camera not on? And why did you not deploy your taser? And it's why we have policies to, actually officers get, they get dinged if they don't have their body-worn camera on, because there's no way in an investigation when something happens to know what happened without that body-worn camera. Sometimes what we think of, right, like the first thing that comes to people's minds is the Laquan McDonald scenario. But there are also times when the officer did not do anything wrong. In fact, those times I would say statistically happen more time than not. There are times when officers find a person in crisis, and without the right tools or without the time and space, legally, folks are killed. Every day, it actually happens quite often. And that officer, I've never ever met an officer that wanted to kill someone. I've never ever met an officer whose life was not changed forever after killing an individual. Without these cameras, without these tools, we can have no truth on either side. We can have no accountability, and frankly, we can't really have public safety. What we're trying to do, why as just a city that you're going to want to have these tools, is because these are best practices in policing. You are literally adjacent to one of the largest cities in the United States. You should have access to the best practices of tools in policing. These are important things. You all deserve it. You all deserve these tools. You deserve it. And I think what Axon does well, the reason I decided to join Axon, is because they are laser focused on making tools for community. I'm only talking about two tools. We have tons of other technology that addresses this, but every day, what I do, most of my day is not spent here with you all. It's spent on the phone with our CEO and major chiefs, superintendents, and commissioners around the country, sometimes that find themselves with critical incidents, trying to figure out how can we be of help? How can we bridge this gap between you and the communities that you serve? Being from the East Coast, I'll tell you, I've never heard of Kenosha, Wisconsin, before in my life. Never ever heard of it. I go there now every Saturday because my son plays basketball, AAU, and it is so sad. I don't know if any of you have been there recently. Everything is boarded up. Everything. The amount of pain and trauma between police and community there is so sad. And what we have to do is we have to come together to try to find answers to these problems. It's so crucial. Like, we're in the most crucial time ever. And I can tell you, regardless of where you stand on the political side, in November, these issues are going to become so pertinent. Regardless of who wins the election, best practices in policing is going to be at the top of everyone's list. Congress is thinking about this on both sides, Republicans and Democrats. This is important. And what I don't want for you, as your neighbor in Evanston, is I don't want you to become Kenosha. And I don't want people to ask you why you didn't do better for your community. Why didn't you demand for your community accountability? Why didn't you demand for your community transparency? This is what we all want. And you have to ask yourself, cost. Look, I have 4 kids. I understand it's expensive. But at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what are the stakes and what are the costs? I have a brother that was killed by gun violence, and I can tell you there's no amount of money that can justify that death. And I know Bertha has a similar story. And what I want for none of you is to ever have to weigh that cost between someone that you love and a tool that can add transparency and accountability and safety. And lastly, I'll say to the cost piece, because the gentleman that was speaking did not fully go into it, is officer wellness. We need these tools also for our officers who are part of our community. And if we don't see that, what are we doing? Like, they are part of our community too. And what we find in jurisdictions that don't have these tools is that you have officers that are on sick leave, disabled, or can never come back to work. As soon as an officer has to put his hands on someone without a tool that is more, there's more of a scientific, okay, we know scientifically 99.9% of the time this is what's going to happen, as soon as they have to put their hands on, that officer is going to end up injured and someone else is going to end up injured too. And that goes to the budget and to the cost. And it also goes to their family and to our community. And so I'll tell you, I kind of skipped one little thing that I did in between COPA and now, which is the New York University Law School's policing project that had a pilot in Chicago. And this is how I come to meet Ms. Bertha. That pilot, which was in the 15th district, your neighbors, right here, and the 25th district, the entire point of this project was to give community voice in policing. And as you all know, like, CPD is not an easy department to work with. It's not easy. But we worked really hard with these officers and this community to figure out what their priorities were. And sometimes those priorities weren't aligned. And you know what? The 15th district said, yeah, like, it's important to know what they think and how they want to be policed. And every day, it wasn't easy, it was hard. But every day those officers came to work, they came to meetings, they met with us, they met with community, and we came to consensus. And in their trainings, yes, we have the detective training and traditional trainings, but community had a segment of that training to train officers on their priorities and their community and what that looks like. And so I guess what I'm offering you before I hand it over to Ms. Bertha, and this isn't really Axon, this is just Regina as your neighbor. I'm offering you, if you need help organizing folks in a way to bring those voices forward, I would love to do that for you. I can't speak for Ms. Bertha, but I will bring her along, whether she wants to or not. And we will do that together. We can help you find solutions to these problems, and we can work to help you mobilize to have a better relationship with each other, and it's so important. And so I'll let Ms. Bertha tell you a little bit more about her life and her journey, and about maybe our experience working together on the policing project.
Thank you all. I'm going to shift a little bit because I have my back to you all. Again, my name is Bertha. I am a nurse by education. I am a community activist.
Could you use the microphone so the folks at home can hear you?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I shifted too much.
A little bit, thank you.
My name is Bertha. I am a nurse by education. I am a survivor, and I am an advocate for survivors. I worked full-time as a nurse up until 2017 when my youngest son was killed on the streets of Chicago. So I started my own organization, Mothers on a Mission, because I was on a mission. And how I came to meet Regina was one of my aldermen, because I was very active in making sure my son's killer was off the street. And when they started the policing project in the 25th district, my alderman called me because he knew that was very dear to me. So I am one of those people who get up in the middle of the night or whenever to go work with survivors. I am one of those people who I am their voice till they get their voice. I work with them wherever they're at. I am also a person who is not anti-police. I believe that just like there are bad surgeons, there are bad police. I understand that when adrenaline is running, that if those cameras are not on, a good police might forget something and not write it in a report, and then he's danged for the rest of his life. What he might have forgot because adrenaline was flowing to put on a report, they're holding it against him for the rest of his life. Those cameras are not only for the police, they're for the community, and it's what's best for everybody. And that is what we need to look at today. One incident is one incident too many. When you get those calls in the middle of the night and you have to go running because something has happened, if somebody can say for sure or replay and know for sure, there's not as much he said, she said, and a lot of what's going on is eliminated because those cameras are on. Their best was act for everybody as a part of shared safety with the police and the community. Those cameras are what's best for everybody. I do not work for Axon. I don't have a dog in this race. The community is my first concern. I am a community member first and foremost. This is really important to me and the survivors that I work with. I cannot speak for the people of Berwyn. I can speak for the survivors that I have worked with. And everyone that I work with
feels that this is what's important for our shared safety, and that should be important to everyone. Any questions for me? I am not a public speaker. I am not that person. But I am one to advocate for somebody. So if you all ever need somebody to advocate for you, call me, I'm coming. Regina knows if you call me where there's a community stake in the race, I am that dog for that race. I am the one who fights for a community, not for what Bertha wants. As a survivor, we have to be heard. I'm one to listen to survivors, and I'm gonna fight with you. And this is some things that I have heard from the survivors that I work with. And a survivor, we might be surviving from domestic violence, from sexual assault, whatever we're surviving from, we have been impacted by trauma. We have been victims to trauma, and we need to have a voice in the race. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you.
Just so you know, Miss Bertha did live in Berwyn at one point in time. She was on 18th and Oak Park and then 18th and Gunderson, right?
That's right.
She chose to move back to Chicago. Mike?
Okay. Hello all. So I'm here to talk to you guys about the budget aspect of it, but I think it's important that we segue into budget kind of with a look back to where we came from and how we got here. So in 2018, we did a comprehensive department analysis. We hired out a company called Hillard & Hines, which is nationally recognized. They do a lot of work for the Justice Department. They do departmental assessments, and basically they came in and looked at our department and gave us a list of things that we should look towards fixing or improving as we move forward. I think a lot of you were on the council, if not all of you, except maybe one or two, back then, and we brought it to the council and we told you what we were doing. We brought you some of our findings, and we told you that we were going to be coming to you in the future for help. We're going to need help. We can't do this alone. Some of these fixes aren't free. Some of them require community input. Some of them require, just help in general. So one of those things that we're trying to build from that point forward is different tools that we can use to increase our transparency, our accountability, and public trust. And those three things aren't something that I think that we can purchase. Once you lose those, they're gone forever. So we wanted to be on the progressive side of this and get ahead with some of the technologies that other departments have been deploying to keep us on the front side of policing instead of on the catch-up side. So we looked into some statistics and saw that body cameras are a national trend. In 2017, the Justice Department released a study that said that 50% of the police departments in the United States were using body cameras in 2017. And another 25% we're planning on moving to them in the next 1 to 3 years. That puts us to 2020. Somewhere between 50 and 75% of the police departments in the country are predicted to have body cameras right now. Berwyn doesn't have them. We constantly get freedom of information requests that ask for our body camera and our in-car camera video on a daily basis. I'm sure the clerk can speak to that. People expect us to have this technology. They expect us to have this accountability to them when they ask for it. And when we don't have it, we get feedback. We get, are you guys in the Stone Ages? What's wrong with you? Why don't you have cameras? We get a lot of things directed towards us, like we're doing something wrong just by not having these cameras here in the first place. So we've been moving forward with this, as Sergeant Fitzgerald said, and we're trying to get to a point where we have that community trust. Things did get accelerated with this year because of all of the stuff that happened, and we are where we are here today. I think a lot of the things that were brought up here, again, are just not tangible. Right? You can't put a price on a life. You can't put a price on trust. You can't put a price on community support. You can't get that. So we've talked about this before. It was up at committee of the whole about a month ago. We went to the budget committee. We discussed it at length in the budget committee. It came back out, and now we're back at committee of the whole. So Sergeant Fitzgerald did talk about these low priority, high impact incidents. I would argue that this is probably the highest priority or highest probability in my career of 25 years of something bad happening is right now. The climate on the streets, again, for whatever reason, nationally, is that people want to challenge the police. People want to fight the police. People want to take everything as far as they absolutely can and put you in a position that you don't want to be in as a police officer. The impact, again, higher than I think it's ever been. When since the 1960s have we seen such civil unrest that could be triggered by the smallest little thing in the community that, as the speaker before me had spoken and said, sometimes they're not wrong. Sometimes the information that gets out there is just not the right information. Sometimes it's social media information. Sometimes it's a portion of somebody else's body camera or somebody else's phone footage that doesn't capture the entire incident. So we want to make sure that we're prepared for these incidents when they happen. Kenosha, $50 million in infrastructure damage in a weekend. That's the kind of costs that I think we should be considering when we talk about costs. Not just what's this going to cost us out of our pocket, what's it going to cost us down the road to bring back our community, to rebuild our community when something like this happens. And I'm here to tell you, it's not if, it's when something like this happens. Last police officer involved shooting we had here was 13 years ago. I can tell you that because I was there. Man that was out on parole for 4 times robbing people with firearms, robbed the Popeyes at Cermak and Home Avenue. We cornered him in the alley. He shot at 3 of us. The last shot, his gun jammed. Pointed it at us, he pulled the trigger, and the gun jammed. We didn't pull the trigger on him. We could have killed him, but we didn't. He was shot twice. He was arrested. He was convicted 3 times of attempted murder on a police officer. At that point in time in my career, I never even considered a body camera. But if I was standing there today, and that happened again today, I would definitely want that body camera on me to capture my side of the story. Because that's what happened to us, and we almost died over it, and the public deserves to know what really happened. So with that being said, I'm going to just move forward to just kind of the overview that we went into over our, let's see, which way are we going here now? I think I'm at the end, beginning instead of the end. Well, the overview that we talked about in the budget committee meeting. Here it is. So this may be kind of hard to see, but we've identified funding for the first 2 years. So as we know, we were looking at a 10-year contract, which 10 years is kind of the greatest value for us because there are some investments that we need to make outside of just the contract. We need to make some infrastructure investments into our building. Some things need to be changed around so we can get deployment. We need to train and assign people to overview the data and the equipment. So the cost, the initial buy-in costs of the equipment and so forth are going to be the same whether we go with a shorter-term contract or a long-term contract. So the best value in this is in a longer-term contract. 10 years was one of the options that we chose because the costs were spread out over a longer period of time, and again, the initial investment was of better value to us that way. We've an issue, we can't predict what's going to happen here in 3 years. We didn't predict the pandemic. We don't know what's going to happen financially with the nation, with recessions, things like that, how we're going to be in 3 years. But we have been able to offset the initial equipment purchase and our first year of the contract here. With different things here. I don't want to necessarily, I could take questions if you want. I'll go over just a couple of things, but not to bore you with every single line item. Keeping in mind, we do have an existing Axon contract, and there is money in the budget every year for our tasers. And, that is a portion of it because they are an existing vendor of ours. With some of the expenditures that we've had this year, we've had a little bit of fortune in our overtime department because we haven't had court and things like that because the courts have been closed. So we do have some money there, and we anticipate that that's going to continue forward into fiscal year 2021. We're looking at some grants, but the grant deadlines are not necessarily in line with getting money before the end of this current fiscal year. So we're hoping to get some grants for next year. can offset some money from our training budget. And we're looking at higher revenues moving into to the new year, and I think we talked about this and some of the other things that have been before the council with our collection process and our bringing our parking department back in-house. Personnel variance, we do have some money in the budget as well for personnel that have left during the pandemic that we have not yet been able to replace. We have some CARES Act money that we can reappropriate to different things and then use that money for the funding of the cameras. And then, again, finally, the existing Axon money that's already there for the current taser system that we do have in place. So with all that, I guess I can open it up to whatever questions you may have about anything that's been presented tonight. If I can't answer them for you, we can get whoever else has the answers.
Council members, questions?
I do. Are you ready?
So you have grants. So in 2020, you got 0 grants, and in 2021, 15,000 in grants. What grants are those? Where
Well,
are they coming from?
So it's not that we get 0 in grants, it's that there's no possibility of us applying. So the grant cycle works, it's a multi-year cycle. So typically we'd have to apply for a grant 2 years in advance, then it gets approved the final year, and then you have 2 or 3 years to spend the money. So it's kind of one of those things where you kind of got to get into the cycle on the front end of it, and then we get the money a year or 2 down the line. So we're hoping that we can reappropriate about $15,000 out of different grants for next year.
So these are grants that already existed, you're going to take money out of? Is that my understanding?
We're hoping to apply for some grants that we could somehow get into the hopper in enough time for next year, yes. We don't have anything existing now. We don't have, if we apply for a grant, we have to make a promise to whoever's giving us the grant that we're going to do this. And we just simply don't have approval yet. We can't make that promise until we actually get approval to move forward.
So what grants are out there? So let's say everything goes fine, and we say, okay, go for it. What grants are out there for you to get for 2021 since 2020 is over?
Well, we presented that at the budget committee meeting. I didn't bring all the minutia here with me, but yeah, we presented that to the budget committee, and the timelines.
Can you provide that to us, because we weren't all at the budget meeting, we don't have access to that.
You don't have access to the budget committee?
It's not in front of us, so we don't have that, so.
Okay.
It was,
Yeah.
it was sent to all of us, huh?
I don't remember.
It's also available on our Facebook page if you can watch that meeting.
Yeah, it was live streamed.
That's not the document, though. So how do we get the document in our hands? So
Well, we
that
don't, again, we don't have a grant. This is what we hope to do. Again, if we get approval, which we don't have yet. So we don't have a grant right now. And again, the grant is a very small portion of this. I mean, $15,000 is.
I'm just wondering how you came up with that 15,000. Where exactly is that money coming from?
We're
Why
ho-
not 20,000?
It's kind of a low general number that we're hoping that we can get at least $15,000 in grants. I don't think that, I think some of these other numbers, again, these are projections,
Okay.
you know.
Do we know what grants are out there for this type of body camera financing? What is
We
out
do
there?
have a letter to our state representative who supplied monies on a discretionary funding through one of the other communities in her district. So we do have a request of her. We haven't heard back yet as to whether or not there's still some discretionary funding available to her, but we do have a letter requesting it of her. She actually, at a meeting that her and I had, asked me to send her that letter, and we sent that.
Okay, and that was for Cicero, I believe, right? She listened to the budget
Correct,
committee.
correct.
Do you know how much she got for Cicero?
I don't know exactly, no. I can find out, but I don't know the amount.
Some of the grants we can apply for, they're matching grants, which means, again, that we would have to promise or make the purchase in advance and then apply for reimbursement, matching reimbursements. So there are things out there, but again, a lot of them have the caveat of we kind of need to make the first move and see what we're going to do here. If we're not going to do this, then we can't apply for the grants. If we are, then we need the approval in order to do that.
So 2020, you got with the 3, you got past language you glasses. $331,000, is that?
Yes.
And then, 2021, 393, but we have no way of knowing 2022, 23, 24, 25. Is that correct?
I don't have any, I can't predict 2 years worth of, revenues from 2 years from now or expenditures. There's a lot of variables in here. Truthfully, the contract itself is a variable because, we had hoped that we had moved the contract forward by now, and the numbers on that are changing. Those are going to have to be reworked as well. So again, this was numbers a couple of months ago based off what the numbers were at the time for the contract and so forth. Things change,
This is a little bit off the topic of the money, but what, so you said June 2020, something precipitated the discussion on this. What was that? Was it just national, what it was happening in the country?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess what I'm getting at is we seem to be in a hurry of getting, we're in October, right? We got October, November, December. Why do we need to get this in 2020, or what's the rush? If we wait till 2021 and then start the process of looking for grants and budgeting, what's the difference with the 3 months?
Well, there's no sense in looking for grants if you don't have a contract approved. That's what he's trying to tell you.
So if we approve a contract for 2021 and start looking for
He
grants,
can't look for a grant if you don't have a contract, because you have to have something in place that you're asking for the grant for.
We're also looking at a $388,000 annual contract, of which $15,000 is what they're projecting for grants. I'm not sure that grants are our biggest problem.
They're not. I don't know why we're harping on that.
Yeah,
but
I would agree with you.
The question is that first year, second year, or whatever it is going forward, what's a life worth?
We're expecting a legislative mandate here.
You can laugh all you want, but that's the question. It
Right.
was quite plain.
Mr. Mayor, you can suggest that I'm laughing about a life. I'm not at all. We're talking about $3.8 million. So let us ask our questions.
I'm not saying you can't ask your questions. Nobody stopped you from asking your questions. You did a laugh when I made that statement.
You don't know what I was laughing about, but
Well,
thank you very much.
obviously not.
I have a question, gentlemen.
Thank the Lord I'm not in your
about
mind.
process. So, I'm sorry, has anything good?
yeah,
I'm sorry, did we answer your question, Alderman, here? Part of the, I'm sorry not to cut you off, but I want to make sure we answer his question as well. I think we're all expecting a legislative mandate that's going to put this as a must instead of a should. And at that point, if we're not planning for this in advance, all of this $393,000, it's going to go to something else that's mission critical, like our CAD or RMS, one of these other systems that we're going to need. And then once we get this mandate, we're starting from zero. So we're trying to come here, we're trying to stay ahead of it, and we're trying to
Sure.
get everybody on the same page.
So my question, I have actually a lot of questions, but one of them is about process. So in June of 2019, y'all started internal conversations. What was the time frame that y'all set for those internal conversations? That a year later, when Mr. Floyd was killed, suddenly there's a crisis. But how did that meet your timeline that had already been established in that conversation that began in July of 2019? Can you help me with that?
Well, I think it definitely moved the timeline a lot quicker.
Where were you at that point? How many conversations did you have with other companies regarding what our needs were in Berwyn specifically?
Can you repeat what part of the question?
So you said that internal actually
Yep.
it was Sergeant Fitzgerald who said that the conversations began in July of 2019. Where were you all in those conversations? How many conversations had you had? What were the things that you had gathered as your assessments about what Berwyn's needs were? How can we see those documents so that we could be brought into that conversation? I'd like to know, before the national crisis, what is the assessment of Berwyn's needs and Berwyn's resources from your perspective?
Well, I think we started with that in 2018 with the Hiller and Hines report. We delivered reports. We delivered a year-end report last year
Can you give me
to the council.
Can you give me the data that you guys accumulated that was feeding your conversations for July 2019 up to June of 2020?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Mr. Fitzgerald, do you understand my question?
I understand how I'll address it. Just repeat it one more time so we want to understand what we're talking
I-
about.
So you've noted on your timeline that your conversations regarding cameras really started in July of 2019, not with Hillard and Hines, but 2019 in July. I'd like to know how that conversation started. I'd like to know what conversations followed that, so that when 2020 came on top of all of us with Mr. Floyd's death, that y'all understood that there was a reason to accelerate. Because how does the national timeline accelerate Berwyn's needs? Because suddenly we have a $3.8 million contract in front of us, and I'd like to know how that came about. And if it's not a reaction, but in fact an intentional process, I can have a different conversation with you all. But I fear that the information that you will provide to me will suggest that the conversation actually began in June of 2020, and not as robustly as you suggested in July. So I'd like to hear differently about that.
Commander Oshner and I assumed our current positions in
So
the police department
Okay?
in February of this year.
So you can't speak to that.
If the chief told us during what happened after June 2020, moving forward, if he said he had discussions,
Certainly.
I was not part of those discussions, but I was part of the discussions from June 2020 moving forward. So I hope that clarifies
It
that one.
does. It clarifies
Yes.
that I shouldn't ask you to answer a question you don't have knowledge of. So I would be asking the chief.
I have some knowledge. We started the Axon conversation back then because we're near the end of our life cycle on the current tasers that we have. And this was a question of whether or not we should expand our current relationship with Axon with the new taser program to cameras as well, or to keep it as it is, or what, you know, when to do that, how to phase into that, and so on and so forth.
And what was that timeline, sir?
That started in last.
No, but when you projected out when those changes need to be made, what was that timeline?
They're at end of life right now. We needed to make a decision in this calendar year, which way we were going to go. As far as implementation, of course the implementation got sped up, but the decision on whether or not to expand it was scheduled for this year.
So we would have expected to have this conversation in the fall of 2020, regardless of what happened in June of 2020.
Yes, because of our taser end of life.
Thank you.
Now, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you were.
No, that's fine. I guess the next question I have is, y'all have moved to understanding that you need community input, and you've scheduled 2 sessions for the community to be involved in, one in English and one in Spanish, and they're coming in this next 10 days, right?
Yes.
One on Thursday and Thursday. Does that seem like a sufficient amount of time to give people an opportunity to speak from a full demographic, every demographic region, which I heard you speak to, Sergeant, about needing everyone, not just allies of people, but the actual people to speak? How does 2 sessions meet that high, lofty goal?
So the 2 sessions are and we anticipated those in the beginning, and we're open to having more sessions as need be.
Can you tell me when the beginning was, Mr. Richard?
I'm sorry?
You said you anticipated those from the beginning. When was that? The first I heard about these sessions was as a response to what happened after it, and actually in the last 10 days, I heard that there would be these sessions. So when was it planned before that?
I was referring to the beginning of the presentation. We were made aware of this after the last cow session.
Okay.
We were also made aware of this after the last city council session. So I apologize, just to clarify. We are anticipating 2. We've heard, we've listened. We're going to start the conversation with 2, and that can scale out accordingly.
Okay. I guess the concern that I have is that before it got pulled from city council agenda, it was up for a council vote. We had a contract with Axon ready to go. If council had approved it at that meeting, we would have had no community conversation at all. And my concern is that something of this magnitude deserves far more caution and engagement and intentionality than your department has given it. So how do you understand the process? And maybe you can't speak to it, and if that's true, I appreciate that. But how are we supposed to move forward in a conversation about the contract before us? Because I hear still in your conversation that this contract could be signed by the end of the year. Is this what we need? And I don't know that we have enough information to determine that, but I hear y'all are still talking that way. So are you putting forward that we would go with anyone other than Axon, or is Axon the only thing y'all are bringing to us?
Well, we brought it to you the first time because they're the only person that can meet, or the only entity that can meet all of the check, the boxes. They're a sole source. They're the only person that does, the only company that does what they do with the tasers, which we already have. So if we were to do that, we would probably be coming to you with a much higher price tag and be asking you for additional employees to integrate the systems, which I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would venture to say would be a
Sure.
higher cost.
I have a concern about that because Aurora just published a PowerPoint of their latest meeting where they list $592 per officer for their equipment costs. So an $88,000 equipment bill for cameras. And we're looking at $3.8 million. And so I'm asking, if y'all went to bid and sent this out with apples to apples comparisons, would we have different numbers? Y'all didn't provide us that, and so I don't know. But I do look at another community that has determined whether they're going to have body cameras and in-car cameras, and their numbers are far different than what y'all provided for us. So, and that may feel like I'm springing it on you, but it's part of the public conversation. And so, what am I supposed to do with that in terms of y'all are bringing us the best contract? Because there was a general RFP that was not specific to Berwyn's needs, but a national conversation about contracts. And this is the company that brought in the best numbers. For what?
Well, I think you hit it on the head with the apples to apples comparison. Again, this is not just body cameras. This is 4 different things. And not all these departments had that. We've done our due diligence. Joe could probably speak to Aurora. He's investigated Aurora. We spoke to Schaumburg. We spoke to some of these other departments that have had this stuff. I provided the documentation again to some of the aldermen that have asked. And that's part of what drew us to our conclusion. These other departments weren't happy with some of the other vendors, both with the response, with the way that the equipment worked, with the way that it integrated with the systems that they currently had, with it integrated with the systems that we have. So we have to look at efficiency as well. We have to look at what's best for what we're doing here. So I don't know if you want to speak to Aurora. I know that you researched that aspect of it.
We recently learned of Aurora. Our knowledge is that it has a lower number. They already have an existing solution out there. We don't know what their RFP is because it's still in process at this point. Yes, the number is lower on there. Referring back to this slide, we're looking at cameras, we're looking at equipment, and we're looking at storage. Storage is expensive on here, but it's streamlined and allows us to get what needs to get done with police operations on a daily basis. So over the next couple of weeks, we can reach out, find some more information, make that apples to apples on there, because yeah, they're putting an RFP out there and they're either supplementing what they have or moving to something not as comprehensive that we're doing, but I think that needs to be part of the conversation as we move forward.
Thank you. I would very much appreciate that conversation. I have some other questions about policy, but I will defer to my colleagues if they would like to get in.
Yeah, I actually have another question. One thing I didn't understand was when you were saying these cameras and police help. So I don't get the correlation. I appreciate your presentation, but what I got was that these cameras make a police officer do the right thing. And I know that's not what it was supposed to come out as. So I just want if you could explain to me how do cameras correlate with police health?
Well, that was so I refer back to that slide that we spoke about earlier on with an issue with some of the cons on officer health and safety, right? Those don't necessarily fall into the basis of that study, because it was a literature review done by Dr. White, is that officers' health and safety have to do with a couple of issues. One, right, is that if you look at improved police officer behavior in conjunction with improved citizen behavior, the probability of physical interactions would be lessened, right, in the grand scheme of things when you look at the overall situation. A lot of the other things that they were talking about, so that's a pro, right? But what they're talking about with officers' health and safety is not only in conjunction with that, but this was initially done when cameras weren't as streamlined as they were. This is a seminal literature review, but it's also, with the cons it's taking on, it's taking on issues that presented themselves, especially with that one, officers' health and safety, was on how the body cameras were actually carried and stored. They were heavy, they were clunky. That weared on the officer's body. Now that was 6-7 years ago when this happened. Actually, probably more than that, because they needed some time to gestate some of the information that they under. So you're talking 8 years ago in the early aughts of that happening. That was an issue back then, right? That con can be debated at this point, not for the physical interactions, but with the wear and tear on an officer's body with the cameras that have to be mounted on their, I don't want to go too into it, but you understand where we're coming at that point. So I hope that clarifies that out. It's a combination of both.
Okay. And then what is there was somebody alluded to, if the officer doesn't turn on his camera, they get dinged. What is it dinged?
So if a critical incident happens and an officer does not have their body worn camera on, so picture someone is shot and there's no body worn footage, but you have a body worn camera, then the officer would be in trouble for that. It's a violation of policy in Chicago and in most cities that have body worn cameras.
And can I just riff off that, because I think it's going to answer your question on here. A ding could be a physical ding, but a ding can also be an administrative one as well, meaning that there's repercussions if that doesn't happen. Now, with our implementation, with the hopes of getting these cameras into the future, right, we're making it as officer-proof as possible, meaning that we're investing into the technology that when your lights go on, there's a trigger, there's a Bluetooth trigger that's going to turn on your camera. If an officer pulls a weapon, whether their gun or their taser, there's a Bluetooth trigger to turn on not only their cameras, but everybody's camera that's in, I believe, a 25-foot radius at that point. It's very hard to believe, putting some of these safeguards in, that an officer's camera would not turn on, right? In these high-stress situations, if one person pulls, another person likely will probably be following suit on there. That's just police practice. And it would be hard to imagine failures, systemic failures on that level if they're set up correctly.
So you're talking a technical failure, or you're
Technical
talking?
failure.
But what is the policy for an officer turning off his camera in a use of force case? What does the ding look like there?
You want to address it, or we can both address it?
Yeah, I can. The majority of the on and off protocols are state law. It's not even discretion on the part of the police department that we could say you can do this, you can't do that. If you look up the Body Worn Officer Camera Act, it's explicit in there when the cameras have to be on and when they have to be off.
And what are the penalties if they're not?
Up to termination. There's civil penalties and then administrative penalties up to termination.
And what I've been led to understand is that while those might exist. They are not actually used. Is that correct or incorrect? How many folks have been suspended or terminated for turning off their cameras in, say, the state of Illinois?
I don't know that anyone keeps those statistics. If there's somewhere that you know that they exist, I'll go get them for you, but I don't know that type of database exists.
Well, so I think that works both ways. That it's not necessarily to our benefit if you don't have any evidence that suggests when someone turns it off, there's actual penalty.
I'm not sure that I can follow the chain of hypotheticals that you're suggesting.
So it's not on at the beginning of the shift and it stays on for the whole 8 hours? That's not how it's designed to.
There's a lot of circumstances where it's privacy concerns for the citizens as well. Police officers engage in community caretaking. They go on ambulance calls. They're in medical facilities. There's crime victims that don't want to be recorded and broadcast, subject to FOIA. There's confidential informants. There's officers have to use the washroom. There's personal conversations. There's a lot of things that happen during the shift that aren't subject to being recorded and are statutorily prohibited from being recorded. So there has to be that function on there. So that's just the nature of it. It's a lot of it's statutory. I'd refer you back to the statute if you guys want to read through that. And if you find problems in the statute that you think need to be tightened up, we could certainly have that conversation on the policy end of it. But again, we don't have a policy until we have cameras, so we're putting the cart before the horse on that one as well.
Well, that's not necessarily true. We could, in fact, have a policy before we had cameras. We had a policy regarding cannabis in the city of Berwyn before we had anyone even applying for anything. So,
Well, we had a law before we had the policy, before we had the licenses.
I appreciate that distinction, actually. So are you all, does the police department create policy, or does the police department create procedure? And so if policy is created not by you but by the laws, then that would be our responsibility to create policies. Is that-
So can we back up the conversation just a little bit? Because
Sure.
I think there's a loose end that we didn't meet on your initial questioning. The one thing that we have to do is police do policy and procedure, right? We do policy and procedure. The distinction that you're making is whether something is enforceable or drafted. It's drafted at this point, it's not enforceable for a number of reasons. We don't have the product to do it, and it's not implemented. Now, in regards to your initial question that I don't think was completely answered, what are the penalties if something happens? Commander Oshner said that it's up to termination on there. It's a progressive discipline that's built in to our policy and procedures at that point. It's enforced by the chief of police, the deputy chief, and his administration on there. So in terms of policy, it's drafted. It's a living document at this point. Once it's approved, then it becomes enforceable.
I got a question. The last meeting that we had, we asked the constituents over here, you know, if they had any more questions, they should submit them to you guys through email, through phone calls. Did we get any of that?
No.
Nothing at all, okay.
Everything was directed to my email address.
Uh-huh.
It was, and I have not received anything yet.
Okay. And these two sessions that we're having, I do appreciate you guys doing that, opening up to the community, because they do have some questions and some, we need to answer them. And I know that if we need another session, you guys will schedule that, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Question on the budget, the CARES line item. So the CARES offset, could you go through that? It's my understanding that the CARES offset is to reimburse for expenditures related to coronavirus. So how does that get applied here?
There is a provision in the CARES Act that we can pay for first responder salaries during the pandemic. So we can offset the salary that we had already budgeted and put that towards this project. since we're getting reimbursed through the CARES Act for that money.
We don't have to demonstrate that the salary of that officers is COVID related, or basically the salary?
We demonstrate that they served during the pandemic and that they were paid payroll during that period of time. And CARES Act can reimburse us for that because it was pandemic response.
Is this regular time or overtime?
Either one.
Either one. Would it be a wash? I mean, if we paid the salary and then we get reimbursed, I'm just, that's already part of the budget, how does that augment the budget? How does it, just help me understand that. How does that contribute to the bottom line?
Well-
331 for the 1 year.
Yeah, it's an offset. Like you said, we paid it and we budgeted for it, but then we got money back that we weren't expecting to get. So it's a bit of an offset that we can then reappropriate to something else like this.
I have a couple questions. So in regards to the budget, can you speak a little bit on the training that you have budgeted here? You have $10,000 for each year, so how exactly is the training affected?
Right now,
To make that 10,000?
right now, there's only one state police academy that's operating. All the mobile training units through NEMRT have been shut down for a period of over 6 months now. So pretty much all of our mandated training has come to a screeching halt. So we have about yearly about $100,000 worth of training that we do, and we're not able to do it because of the pandemic. So there's money sitting there that's appropriated for training, which unfortunately we're not getting. But if it's going to go to another benefit, we would hope it would be something else that we can serve the community as well.
What is that total amount you said you have?
The annual training budget's between $80,000 and $100,000, depending on what's scheduled for that particular year.
And most of that is still available due to the pandemic?
Well, yes and no. So, again, at least $10,000 of it, which should be available. We've had to use some of that money to do some remote training, to buy some software and things like that to keep up with state mandates where we weren't able to physically do that. So as we move forward, we need to make a decision whether or not we're going to stay with the remote training and the digital training or go back to in-person training and transition there. But we're definitely comfortable in saying that $10,000 this year and $10,000 next year is very easy to do.
Okay. And then can you speak a little bit about the personnel variance that you have as a line item?
Right. We lost quite a bit of personnel during this year, and we weren't able to hire them in a timely manner. So as people leave, not only do they leave at a higher salary, and then we hire people at a lower salary, but there were significant gaps in time where there was a position available that wasn't filled at all.
Can you give me a number?
I could give you it'd kind of be an actuary, to be honest with you, because like I
Give me an
said,
estimate. Give me your best shot.
$105,000.
No, I'm talking in personnel. How many positions is that you're referring to?
Well, we have 8 officers in the academy right now. We're down 3 currently, so that would be 11. We have an IT person that we budgeted for this year that we have not hired. We're down a dispatcher. And again, with the 8 new hires, they replaced 25, 30-year officers with probationary pay. So the variance between that, I would definitely say it's well greater than $105,000. Again, these are very low ball figures, but
Okay.
that's the generality of it.
And then the forfeiture amount that you have there, what do we and I know I'm probably, because I don't know this off the top of my head, so if you don't have the answer right now, I'd appreciate it later. But historically, what do we normally have annually in forfeiture money? Like, is it usually 100,000, 90,000? I mean, what is our average annually?
It varies again. I don't manage the asset forfeiture accounts, but I have in the past. It varies. We have federal and state asset forfeiture accounts. We have officers that are deployed to different task forces. They get percentages of money. There's money that we know that we're going to get that we just don't know when we're going to get it sometimes. We were paying two different officer salaries out of that money. Right now, we're currently paying one. We're going to get the other one probably back on by the end of the year, where we'll be paying 2 full officer salaries out of the asset forfeiture. It kind of depends. It's not one of those things where we can fully anticipate what's going to happen, what changes in legislature are going to happen. Prosecutorial discretion is involved in that as well on some of these cases, because they're basically civil prosecutions. So I really, I don't know the exact number. I would say that at times, the state asset forfeiture has been in the hundreds of thousands, and I think the federal one's been in the several hundreds of thousands at any given time.
But you feel comfortable with this number for
Yes.
the 2 years?
Yes, we got the number from the commander that does manage that, and he says he's comfortable with that amount of money in the first 2 years, and then we'd have to just kind of reallocate it then.
Okay.
Year 3, we'd have to look and see what's coming in, what's going out, and how we're doing.
Thank you. And then my other question, so were there any discussions or meetings or information drawn from the other companies, or have all the discussions solely been with Axon?
We, as far as the comprehensive package, it's all been with Axon. We do have 2 cars with WatchGuard in them currently, so we're familiar with WatchGuard, which is one of the other companies up there. Their system doesn't work well with us. There's a lot of downtime. Service is very difficult. Transfer of information is manual. It's very difficult, and it doesn't work well with our work process. We've tested that, actually work tested it, battle tested that, and it just doesn't work for us. So for that reason alone, we really would never look to them. And then again, the other 3 companies they don't offer the storage and the integration with the taser. And as Sergeant Fitzgerald said, the technology to turn the cameras on when these weapons are deployed, they don't offer that.
And you know that because you've done this research on your own, but not factual in having conversations with these companies.
I'll address this in a roundabout way.
Thank
'Cause
you.
It's very important on here, is that it's important that the vendor can tell you, they're all salesmen, right?
Right.
Axon, Panasonic, WatchGuard, they're all salespeople, right? What we derived a lot of information from, like Commander Oshner said, is that for our WatchGuard, it just hasn't worked, right? It's very cumbersome and clunky. In terms of some of our other reach outs, is that we look at the end user, especially departments our size and our capability, and similar in nature to our call volume. Waukegan and Schaumburg are the 2 individuals that we went to, right? Schaumburg is Axon, right? But when we're looking at one of the other ones too, is that when we looked at Waukegan, this is what they presented. This is what Commander Fitzgerald at Waukegan presented to their city council in a recent hearing when they made the switch over. They were getting Motorola for free as a test department, right? It didn't work for them on many different levels. So they went from a free product and service and resource to switching over to the vendor that we were looking at interest in at that point. Now that leads a lot to us in our eyes on here, because the end user will find all the holes to poke in, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats along the way. And a lot of that information, from our initial conversation in June, just to give you context of the timeline, right? Between June and now, we have spoken with other police departments, our peers, and that was a driving force as to validate why we were making a good decision moving forward.
And then my last question. So I heard you use some really key buzzwords that usually sound, definitely grab a resident's attention. So you've used words like George Floyd, transparency, our diversity, being inclusive, and wanting public feedback and responses. But yet that wasn't part of the procedure to get to this point. Can you kind of elaborate on why we're sort of doing what I consider putting the horse before the cart, and now we're working backwards?
We're not denying that this is an expedited process. From June of last year to June of this year to July to August to where at this point. It's there, right? But an overall slowdown when at that point last city council meeting, and hearing the feedback from the community and the concerns is how we're going to make this completely holistic. So you're right. We are trying to engage the community at this point. We do want some feedback, and we're very genuine in what we're doing. And we want that to be related to our elected officials and your constituents and our community.
I forgot the biggest word, trust. That's all. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I got one last one. So who pays Sourcewell? Is it the members like the municipality or the vendors or, I know you said it came out of Minnesota or something.
So we had a slide prepared for that. Sourcewell is funded, they collect a percentage of sales from the vendor when one of their contracts is fulfilled. Agencies aren't charged any membership fees or recurring costs to participate in the program.
So the vendor pays them when they get the contract.
Correct. Them.
So one of those 4 companies that they recommended is their client?
I'm sorry, can you
So-
clarify?
So I saw that that Sourcewell recommended 4 companies, and they get paid if one of those 4 companies gets a contract from someone they represent. They get a contract from someone that they represented those 4 companies to in the marketplace.
They bid it out, they need those for administrative fees.
I imagine they have quite a few administrative fees, but I'm wondered about what the conflict of interest is in terms of getting paid by the companies that that you've just recommended. So is their recommendation,
My response to that, because I think we're going in the right trajectory, is that Chris Robinson, Kim Austin, Carol Jackson, Brandon Town. I don't personally know them, but those are the people that signed off on the contract. As an award, that's the committee through Sourcewell that awarded their contract. They went through a number of different steps. If you remember, Sourcewell is created by Minnesota state law, and they have regulations that they have to follow to. Not only for that, is that the professional acronyms behind these individuals is stuff that they have to, that they're held up to on there.
so
If you'd like to, yeah, we can both get on the phone, or we can get on a call with the entire elected officials and ask. This is what we've derived off for the conversation. If you believe that they're manipulating their results and their methodology to garner special favor on there, that's a question you're going to have to answer and ask them.
actually, Sergeant, it's not. In the conversation of trust and relationship, I'm asking you, and when you tell me that that Sourcewell gets paid by the people that they recommend by the number of contracts that they receive from those recommendations, I turn back to you and we can return to the question of trust. And this is the relationship that builds that conversation for me. And I'm feeling the conflict of interests all over the place.
So does that mean that they can't look outside of member companies? So when they're putting in an RFP or they're looking at companies that can do what we want, are they limited to those companies that they're going to get paid from, or can they look beyond that? I don't know if there is something.
I think this is a better way to frame the conversation for both you and Alderman Reardon. Between November of 19, I'll reiterate this slide on there, between November and January, they did an open RFP that was advertised nationally. If anybody in this room wanted to garner business and show interest, they would have responded to the RFP. They had 80 interested parties. I can provide everybody on this council the RFP, the final committee report, the methodology, and the metrics that they used when dealing with this whole process along the way. It's actually posted on their website. If you were to look up contract RFP 010720 on their website, that you would be able to see everything. So just to get back to your question on here, 80 vendors across the country showed interest on this RFP for public safety video surveillance solutions with related equipment, software, and accessories. 23 responded with complete RFPs that moved them on to the process. They weeded out the people that couldn't answer the questions that were posed in the RFP that they put out there. Out of those 23, they determined that 4 met or exceeded the criteria for their nationwide needs and wants. I'm confused where we're going down the trajectory of conflict of interest, because Axon is not in every single police department across the country. There's other police departments that has laser aiming systems, other ones that have Panasonic, other ones that have a WatchGuard, other ones that just have a regular mom or pop small time video thing based on so I think we're a little confused as to where the nexus of conflict of interest comes in. If they have a methodology, they do the research, and then they choose a handful, a little less than a handful, 4 vendors in the grand scheme of things, after they whittled it down from 80 participating people, that, I mean, they're an entity that have to pay salaries and administrative costs. So do we trust the process? Because I think that's where the question is. Yes, we 100% trust the process on there. We're members. The Berwyn Police Department is a member of it. We trust the process.
So are you paying Sourcewell, or is Axon paying Sourcewell after the contract is negotiated and signed? Because if you are paying it, that
How
makes
is
sense to me.
Sourcewell is funded. They collect a small percentage of the sales from the vendor when one of their contracts are fulfilled.
Thank you.
Agencies are not charged any membership fees or reoccurring costs to participate in the program.
So you're not the client. You're not the vendor in that place. I understand that.
Yes.
I have one other question about the RFP. Is every department in the nation that was covered by this RFP, is it a cookie cutter so that the RFP is actually addressing the needs of Berwyn and the needs of Schaumburg and the needs of Des Plaines or Aurora, or is it exactly the same? Or is there any advantage to having an RFP for what is specifically needed by those municipalities?
That's where our conversation starts with. So to respond to your questions on here, that identification of needs, seeking authorization, drafting solicitation, conducting proposal conferences, receipt of proposals, evaluation responses, recommendation, award contracts, and posting results. Methodology that they use to be, yes, we'll use the term a cookie cutter for all across the nation, right? And that once the awarded contracts are posted, we know that they have gone through a rigorous process at that point. We need to be very cognizant of the fact that a department in Kansas or Alaska may not meet our needs, but they've addressed a good portion of that pie. And that critical discussion on here doesn't necessarily mean that just because one's awarded a contract, let's just say in this scenario that there was only one awarded contract, right? Let's just say in this scenario that there was only one awarded contract. If it didn't meet the needs for us, let's just say that it was WatchGuard, it was the only one, we would likely not move forward with it at that point. We trust the process up to here. It fits the needs with our in-house analysis, our conversation with our peers at other police departments. We were able to do our methodology and whittle it down as to why Axon fits best in this idealized way of where we're trying to have a vendor that deals with cameras, storage, and equipment.
And that conversation with Axon started in June of 2020 in the emergency that was happening after Mr. Floyd's death, right? And so the urgency is the primary motivation for us having this conversation at this point right now.
No, I think that's a mischaracterization. I think we answered that we had been talking about this for a couple of years now. This was the year that we were going to make a decision. True, timeline got moved up considerably, but we were going to make a decision this year whether or not we were going to expand and move into these other services. And back to your other question there, if we were to not use the cookie cutter RFP, we're back to our sole source problem that you didn't like in the first place.
But those other companies do the same business. It's not as attached to our TASER program, but they do business. And so, thank you. I appreciate you answering my questions. I'm good.
Okay, any other questions? Can I have a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole?
So moved.
Avila by Lennon, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Be back at 8 o'clock.
Hey, Annie, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. How's mom?
She's good.
Yeah.
She's a little weak.
Why?
Too much. Because she's doing too much in the yard.
Oh.
And I gotta get surgery on that meniscus there.
Oh, no. The whole from the falling, getting hit, run over or something?
No. This was from a long time ago, from walking.
Oh, forgot your meniscus is down here and your neck's up there. Sorry, didn't make the correlation.
Talk to you, just if you wanted to, about things like that.
We can after February 23rd. Yeah, I prefer to. I know, and I appreciate
Because
that.
I just want to know where, just explain to you my involvement and how this was, like I said, I'm asking how I
Yeah, I think so forever. I got a lot on my plate right now. I'm sure you do too. Yeah. Thank you, love.
Firefighters, paramedics. Well, for some reason, people are saying it was J1, apparently we missed it.
Oh. Apparently we all did, huh, March?
So the people who look at it online.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Almost. You said let you know. Okay, I'm ready. Yeah.
Clerk Paul, can we call the council meeting to order, please?
Lennon.
Here.
Ramirez. Here. Reardon. Here. Fate.
Here.
Santoy. Here. Ruiz.
Here.
Avila.
Here.
Nowak.
Here.
Eight present, Mayor.
If we can all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and please remain standing. Pledge allegiance
To the flag.
United States of America.
One nation. Under God.
Indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If we could all keep in our thoughts and prayers all the men and women we have on the street tonight. Thank you. If anybody wishes to address the open forum, please step forward to the podium. State your name and address, please. Anybody from the audience for open forum? Hearing none. Any alderman, anything for open forum? Okay. Item C1, please.
Item C1 are the minutes of the Committee of the Whole and the regular City Council meeting of September 22nd, 2020.
Make a motion that we approve the minutes for the Committee of the Whole and the regular council meeting that was held on September 22, 2020.
Second.
Motion by Avila, seconded by Fay to approve the minutes for the Committee of the Whole and City Council meeting of September 22, 2020. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Item J1, please.
Item J1 is a communication from Fire Chief Hayes regarding the request to appoint 2 paramedic firefighters selected by the City of Berwyn Police and Fire Commission, Gabriel Munoz and Jeff Abruzino.
Make a motion that we concur with Chief Hayes and the Police and Fire Commission and appoint the 2 firefighter paramedics.
Second. Motion to approve the paramedic firefighter hiring by Avila, seconded by Nowak. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Mr. Munoz, Mr. Abruzino, step up, please. Tony, we can move that. What do you want? We can push this to the side. No, they can come up. Come on. Who's gonna swear you?
Gentlemen, please raise your right hands. Do you, Gabriel Munoz and Jeff Abruzino, having been appointed to the rank of probationary paramedic firefighters for the City of Berwyn Fire Department in the County of Cook aforesaid, do solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Illinois, and that you will faithfully discharge the duties of your newly appointed positions to the best of your abilities?
I do.
Congratulations.
Congratulations, welcome aboard.
Congratulations and welcome aboard.
Congratulations, welcome aboard.
Congratulations, welcome aboard. Congratulations. Thank you.
Gentlemen, if your families want a picture, you want to take a picture with the chief? Right here, sir. Go. Families, come on. Let's do one at a time. Let's do your families.
I like this guy already. He's got a cup and some ascot. All right. Everybody smile.
Congratulations, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
You going downstairs, Tom? Yeah, he's just signing his papers. Item J2, please.
Item J2 is a communication from Police Chief Semaglia regarding amend and restate intergovernmental agreement with the South Berwyn Park District.
Make a motion that we concur with Chief Somaglia and, in amend and reinstate intergovernmental agreement with the South Berwyn Park District as the corporate authorities affix the necessary signatures and place it on its way to passage.
Second.
Motion by Avila, seconded by Noack, to concur with the Chief of Police, Michael Semaglia, and amend and restate the intergovernmental agreement with the Berwyn Park District, affix the necessary signatures, and place on its way to passage. All those in favor, on the call of the roll.
Lennon?
Aye.
Ramirez?
Couple of questions. How many police do we have? Oh, there he is. How many police get assigned a day to Park District duty?
Park District Police and the auxiliary police get all the parks.
Okay, so there's nobody assigned, it's just,
Correct.
okay, and then what's the difference between certified part-time and non-conservator auxiliary officers?
Auxiliary police officers they cannot make arrests. They're non-conservators or police. So if they find something going on, they can detain, but they have to call for a regular full-time sworn officer to make the arrest.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Well,
All right, so, yes.
Aye.
Reardon?
Aye.
Fate?
Aye.
Santoy?
Aye.
Ruiz?
Aye.
Avila?
Aye.
Noack?
Aye.
8 ayes, Mayor.
Motion carried. Item J3, please.
Item J3 is a communication from Building Director Lazara regarding the demolition of 3112.5 South Oak Park Avenue.
That's in my ward. I'll correct that. I think it's 3125 is the correct address. And I will concur with the building director and grant the demolition at 3125 Oak Park.
Second. Motion by Fate, seconded by Lennon, to concur with the demolition of 3125 South Oak Park Avenue. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. The consent agenda?
Make a motion that we
I,
approve the.
sorry,
I'm
I'd
sorry.
like to defer item K4 till next council.
All right,
Right.
motion to pull item J4 and defer. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded, motion made by Ramirez, seconded by Reardon, to pull item K4 and defer for 2 weeks. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Do I have a motion on the remainder of the consent agenda?
Make a motion that we approve the remaining consent agenda as presented.
Second. Motion by Avila, seconded by Noack, to approve the remaining consent agenda as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Aldermanic committee meetings, Alderman Lennon,
Call the chair.
Alderman Ramirez,
Call the chair.
Alderman Reardon.
I would like to announce the Third Ward meeting at 6:30 at Cruxy Park, the one that happens every month. This month, the candidates for Township Supervisor have agreed to come and introduce themselves to the Third Ward, and anybody else in the city who'd like to attend. Mr. Avila and Ms. Owens have agreed to take questions and be introduced, so please come. Call the chair.
Alderman Fate,
Call it, Chair.
Alderman Santoy.
Okay, there's a Budget and Finance Committee meeting as previously called on October 15th, this Thursday at 5 o'clock. Change, we'll be that over early. And as previously called on October 22nd at 5 o'clock. And I will be calling a Budget and Finance Committee meeting for October 28th at 5:30. That's okay with all interested parties?
Yeah.
Yes, invited parties, very good. Okay, so that's all.
Okay, Alderman Ruiz.
There's a Diversity Commission meeting on Monday, October 19th at 5:30 PM at City Hall.
There is no diversity commission. Are you talking about your ad hoc committee one?
Correct, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine. That's
I
fine.
apologize, yes, ad hoc.
Okay. Alderman Avila,
Call it a chair.
Alderman Noack.
Call the chair, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion to adjourn by Noack, seconded by Lennon. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, Mr. Lennon.
Good night, Tony.
So, good night. See you.